Discover how cities are reimagining play for wheels, from Afrofuturist shuttles to civic XR in projects spanning the Smithsonian to South LA. Benjamin Stokes will show how play can emerge from a pickup truck and project just as powerfully as a multi-million-dollar venue. Please welcome Benjamin.
Reimagining play is, can everyone hear me? Do I need to talk in this? Okay, that's better. Reimagining play as this year's Games for Change theme, I think is maybe especially powerful with wheels. Why? Because I think that that's not how we often think about play. It's going to force us to reimagine things if we think a little bit about wheels. And I think that there are some real benefits. My promise to you all with this talk is if we start thinking about play with wheels, we're going to discover new lines of funding, new kinds of games, but also models for how we can be more connected to our communities in a digital age where I think that that's more important than ever. So my name is Ben Stokes, and I run something called the Playful City Lab at American University. And we have Michael, Kristen, we have some people who have worked with my lab here in the audience. We're in Washington, D.C. at American University's Game Center. For the past 5 years or so, I've been doing different experiments and projects to think about mobility. Mobility in cities, I think, is a really interesting space for us to be exploring, partly because it's changing. And I talk a little about this in my book, Locally Played, which I'm going to be doing a book signing if anyone wants to go to the books after the next talk, because we actually have double back-to-back books, games, and urbanism talks, which is a fun thing. So stick around in this room for the next one as well. And then after that, I'm going to go over to the book area. But I wanted to just remind us that all cities already invest heavily in mobility and play. So this is, in some ways, it may sound like an experimental talk, but actually I want us to start with a place of this is normal, that cities invest in stadiums, they invest in softball fields, they invest in bike lanes, they invest in buses. So mobility and play are major investments for all of our cities. And my argument is, for the scale of the investment we're already making, it's shocking how little of that is tied into digital games and is tied into local community history and empowerment. I think it's a huge growth area for Games for Change, but we have to talk about infrastructure. First, I just want to talk about how mobility is changing. Bike lanes are pretty different, even in New York, than they used to be. So our infrastructure is not fixed. It's changing all the time. That's on the top right. Waymo, by the way, who's ridden in a Waymo out of curiosity? Maybe half of us have. I've done it in LA. These cars are all over the place. In San Francisco, they're outpacing Lyft as far as popularity. Of course, bikes as checkout systems are there, but also at the bottom left, this is a bookmobile tied to a library that brings Wi-Fi out to communities. So just a few examples of how mobility is changing, but a reminder with this is that when mobility is changing, it is also converging with media in interesting ways, that the way you check out a bike is with an app. And I think that that's starting to feel so natural that we almost need to make it strange again, to be like, wait, so this bike checkout is a media experience. The Waymo, if you get into a Waymo, there's a big screen right in the back, just like a lot of taxis and things too. But the Waymo screen ties into music systems. What music do you want to play? It's an entertainment experience. It's an immersion experience. And for something that's supposed to be local in terms of the transportation, the content is totally not local. It's totally national. Let's plug you into national music and national radio. Has no local content. This is, in some ways, a failure of imagination as much as it is a failure of policy, but it's also a failure of content. We're not making much local stuff for these tools and infrastructures, and we can do so much more. So where do we start local? Well, I want to tell you a story that begins in South Los Angeles in a neighborhood called Leimert Park. Leimert Park is pictured on the map here. It's a relatively small neighborhood. It's the historic home of African-American culture in Los Angeles. Whether it's Ray Charles, who lived there, Ella Fitzgerald, modern artists like Mark Bradford still make their work there. And this guy here in the bottom right, Ben Caldwell is both a filmmaker, someone I've collaborated with for years, and he's someone that sometimes is called the octopus of Limerick Park. He's a super connector. He's always just like pulling people into different things, and that includes very cultural things like mask parades with African masks, but also thinking about technology. So this is a picture of Limerick Park, but it's been modified as they have started doing more and more futures work. And actually what you see on the left side are a series of self-driving vehicles. They've been doing thought experiments around. And I would argue that game design is an imaginative process. Playfulness has often been part of urban planning already, and game design starts to merge in interesting ways with what communities are already doing. This is some of the work that they've been doing where they think about culture first. Sankofa is a Ghanaian bird that looks to the past while it flies into the future. So thinking about innovation that is culture and history-centric. The neighborhood of Limerick Park has a lot of drum circles, a lot of connections to culture already, and they've been thinking about as Metro comes in, there's a new Metro line that connects them now to the rest of the city. They've been thinking a lot about gentrification. How do we resist gentrification? How do we retain culture? Can self-driving cars be a part of this? So in a series of workshops, some of which I helped run, and then they've gone and moved on and done things far beyond me, a lot of physical prototyping with objects and thinking about what kinds of playful experiences can we make. A cool thing that came out of this is a video that I'm going to show you had game-like implications that were unexpected for the community. I'll show the video though first. Let's see. So what you'll see in this video is a kind of like futures scenario, which is I think close to kind of role-playing in its activity and its form. So the game design practices are part of the futures practices.
Hello, can I get a ride?
Okay,
Great, thank you.
location is confirmed. A shuttle will arrive shortly. Welcome to Los Angeles.
Again, old technology and new technology kind of blending.
Precious song, and it's hot. Tell you the story of having not what you don't know, what you don't got till you need it. Scrambling for that dough, boy. Everybody's alright, we alright.
Welcome. Take the fast food history tour. Learn the history of the hamburger and the soap.
Welcome to Limerick Park. This is the Sankofa History Tour. To your right is the World Stage, founded by Billy Higgins and Kamal Daoud. And to your left, the Vision Theater.
Shuttle stop. I'll get out here.
Okay. Have a nice day.
So it gives you a little bit of a flavor for where of the kind of work they're doing. Now, Ben Caldwell is a filmmaker, so a lot of his approaches have a film basis as where they begin, but is bringing in game designers and whoever else they can. They do hacker kind of events, makerspace kind of events, sometimes with young people, sometimes with old people, but there is a continuity over time and authenticity of community practice that's the origin. It's not just going to do games out of nowhere. This is where it begins. The director of this, along with Ben Caldwell, a guy named Carl Bauman, went on to work at Ford in some of their AI car projects. So this is a neighborhood that often spins people out to go do interesting things in places like industry. But I want to show you one of the things that came out of this, which is unexpectedly to me, and I think to everyone, because there's this emergence that happens sometimes with games and play. The next step of this was shuttles that looked like this at the bottom left. This, with funding from Metro, starting in 2000, there was a fleet of 5-passenger electric shuttles, 3 of them, that were circulating, and they all used an app that you could call, but only within the neighborhood. These are low-speed shuttles. They max out at about 25 miles per hour. You can fit 6 people. Can you guess who used them? It's a lot of older people in the neighborhood who have lower mobility. They're doing about 3,000 rides a month. So it's a significant motion around the neighborhood. When you get in, what's really cool, I think, is you see this sign, Limerick Park Storytelling Routes. So it's hinting at how you might want to move through physical space to tell different stories about that place. And I think this is one of the great lessons for me as we think about the difference between something like Pokemon Go, where it's just points and you could go anywhere you want, to the idea of routes. We know that linear media often tells stories by moving along a story route, if I were to use that a transportation term. And I think that similarly, the idea that we move on paths as we do tours or routes is one way that we tell the story of place. The future of mobility, shuttles like this right now, this one is driven by a human who has a conversation with the people who are in it, tells them things about the neighborhood, but they're actively doing game design. And in fact, they wanted me to pass along this to the Games for Change community. They're looking for people to come and think about what kind of games would you make for shuttles like this, shuttles that are within a specific neighborhood that seek to connect to local culture, local assets in whatever way possible. So I took my kids on it. We had a lot of fun, and it did help us see the neighborhood in a different way. What is the future of mobility? Do more neighborhoods need local transportation? I think this is a really fascinating model for as people age in place, or the young. If you're too young to be getting your own car, how does it, or using an app, how do we move people around through space? Really interesting questions, and again, different funding. This is Metro funding transportation, but it's going to start tying into media as it goes. The next project that I wanted to show, let's see, is a little bit in the direction of democratizing the attention economy. What we saw in Limerick Park is really expensive in terms of time. It takes a lot of time to think through these projects. But I just wanted to contrast that with something we're seeing more increasingly, including Washington, D.C. So this is a truck with an LED that has LEDs on the outside. How many people have seen trucks like this? I think probably that's even more. Most people probably have. This is a relatively new phenomenon. For as little as perhaps like $1,000 a day, you can rent one of these trucks with a driver that will just circulate. And what you're seeing here is an art project that was funded in Washington, D.C., with a friend of mine's organization by the D.C. Commission on the Arts and the Humanities. They're funding just local work, and there are a lot of arts funders that only fund locally. They're not going to fund games that go on the internet that are for a national audience. So it's a separate stream of funding for Games for Change projects than you can see in other places that are local. And let me just show a little. One of the videos was on the truck.
The very small stories that get untold. In my piece, Man of the Skies, I have a boy flying through just to bring the groceries back from the car to the house. Inspired by my...
So there's a picture of a young man, and it's also linked to a particular business. This truck navigates specific routes as it moves through the city. It's tracked by GPS. You can go and meet it at certain locations. The locations that it shows up at are also the site for events. So it's not just that you watch the truck go by, but you watch it go by and maybe you meet it at a particular location. So the activation of space and the attention economy is something that is clearly happening in commercial ways, but again, nonprofit, civic, Games for Change type approaches are relatively untapped. Instead, what we see a lot more, if you're asking what games are being used, it's games like this. Spin to Win, games that are in the marketing, maybe gamification space a little bit. They're trying to capture attention, potentially even manipulate people into giving up their email addresses or contact information or starting a sales chain. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying that isn't part of our society, but like, where's the side that's about connecting into culture, connection into community? So these are a really interesting screen. What does it mean if it's a QR code that starts a game experience? What could we make? I'm hoping that Games for Change as a community starts considering this as a future space for play. To be clear, there actually are a lot of trucks doing play. Let me show you about an interesting model that people might have heard of. Game trucks that come to in front of your house. They'll pull up to the sidewalk right in front of your house. You can pull up your chairs. Sometimes there are screens on the outside, as you can see here, but they also can be screens on the inside. You step into the truck, play Mario Kart. My kids, a lot of their friends are having birthdays with trucks like this. This is a pretty popular thing around Washington, D.C. Industry estimates say there are 1,000 to 1,500 units of trucks like this operating, a lot of custom trucks that people have built out themselves as small businesses. Almost all of them, though, it's Mario Kart. It's often multiplayer stuff. It's not Games for Change, right? We haven't figured out how to access this market. This is like a pretty pure commercial market that doesn't invite content that's local. It's national content, and it's a corporatized content for the most part. Show of hands if you've seen one of these trucks or been inside one. Interesting. So that's even less than Waymo in some ways. So it doesn't reach all places, but especially in kind of in the suburb kind of spaces, I think a lot of these trucks are circulating, and I think it hints at some of the opportunity. No content here, but where are there other trucks where we're seeing content? Well, here are two trucks that have political content. The Trump administration funded 6 semi-trucks, freedom trucks they're called, to crisscross the United States in 2026, bringing stories of freedom and America's history. Just one country. Other countries are doing things like this as well. This is federally funded, but it was based on an idea that came about in Virginia. This is the Virginia 250 campaign. Where does the funding come from? Well, Dominion Energy funded a lot of this. Again, different funders than maybe funding Games for Change or learning games for the most part. At the same time, here's a civic game right here. How well do you know your country? And this is a game that you can play when you get inside the truck. To me, this is pretty close to propaganda. It's tied to some really questionable stuff in the Freedom 250 version of these trucks, like an interactive thing where you can sign the Declaration of Independence, and PragerU, which is not a university, but like a video propaganda company, will then send you to a page about capitalism and why it's actually better than you think it is. I kid you not, the link below the Declaration of Independence goes to a page titled Capitalism. So this is what is circulating across the United States with current funding, and there's a part of me that's like, geez, how do we counterbalance propaganda? Are there local voices that can do this? What institution could do this? And the answer, of course, is libraries. So libraries have trucks. There are somewhere between 600 and 1,000 mobile trucks and buses that our public library systems are offering. They are much more resolutely apolitical than I think the current presidential administration is in some of their approach. And a lot of it is focused on literacy, but I think an open question as libraries become about more than books, right? For a long time, libraries focused on books and holding those kind of print resources. They are still doing great work for kids on literacy, but I think they're also increasingly showing other forms of media. Libraries are great places to learn Scratch, to engage with games and game culture, and I think there's really open questions about how they start bringing those things out in their mobile experiences. We need leaders in the library space doing this kind of work, and there are small examples of this, but it hasn't fully caught on. Again, this is a growth area for Games for Change. I guarantee you in 5 or 10 years, more of these trucks will be doing more digital things. And the question is, how do we get in there? How do we bring some of the games and content that we might be excited about? One thing my lab has been doing, we got a grant to work with public libraries, and we've trained libraries in over 50 cities and states to make their own outdoor games with a low-tech game engine called Hive Mechanic that we built. It's all a lot with texting, multimedia messaging, and WhatsApp to start the experience, but then you can get back pictures, you can get back video, you could have a branching story, you could do an outdoor escape room, you can do scavenger hunts. There's all sorts of things you could do with asynchronous multimedia system. So QR code if you want to go read one of our recent research reports, but let me just show you a couple of the things that some of these libraries made. Chat with the Bookmobile. This is a project at the Arrowhead Library in Arrowhead, Minnesota. And you text hello to this number or scan a QR code that they put up, which pre-fills it. And here's the branching story they were plotting out using Post-its. Post-its is a great form of game design. They were very narrative. One of the things we learned, you can't call them games because these people do not identify as game designers. They identify as maybe people who could tell a story. So we called them story games. We focused on the narrative side. We give them the mechanics, and they start working the story on top of that. What starts out very simple can become complex. Here's a project called Ghost of the Caboose. This is a fairly fixed mobility project. This caboose is historic, doesn't move around a lot, but they built a game inside, and they do the kinds of things that libraries already do well, which is have things like tables out in public space. It's a different form of attention. It's not the App Store. We're not competing with anything on the App Store here. We're competing with people walking along the attention space of the sidewalk. This is a totally different distribution chain than we talk about with digital games. And I think libraries are the most prevalent institution to do this. They are the most popular cultural institution. Even in 2019, before the pandemic, more people were going to libraries in the United States than were going to movie theaters. So libraries are at huge scale, and we can do really interesting things with them. This is what this library started building. This is a map on the left of the story, which started out with just like, we'll send them this message or that message. Every node is a different message that we either send or wait for a keyword. And the library just kept wanting to add more things you could see and places you could go. And that content just kind of grew over time as they started building things. Here's a project that was in Brookings, and I want you to hear some of their motivations for participating.
We chose to do this project because we wanted to build a stronger relationship with our downtown Brookings organization and find ways to get the community involved in community history.
So one of the outcomes with a lot of these library projects is actually the shift in relationships between the library and other community institutions. They were treated differently by City Hall when suddenly they're the ones who are connecting people to town history, the sense of place, the Main Street. It's an interesting kind of outcome because it's not just about what people learned during the game, but what did the process of making the game do for the library as an institution? If we have more of the thousands of libraries around the United States, and this is not just in the US, of course, there are libraries in every country doing really interesting work. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. Here's a game that was made by the DC Public Library for an annual bike tour where they bike around to different libraries and explore. And the key thing here is they do this as a group. So a group of bikers all arrive together. They scan a QR code specific to that library and engage in kind of a trivia game about some of the history that's tied to that particular place. Is this augmented reality? It's augmenting their experience. It's providing media. It's remixing things. It's not high tech. And these are games that are made on hundreds of dollars of budget or even tens of dollars of budget. We can't get into the thousands. That's out of their price range. So it's a different paradigm for the cost of game development than we often think about in industry or even in consulting. Of course, there are high-tech versions. This is a bus that's in Hawaii, the Explore ride, where you can put on an augmented reality headset. And I think we're going to keep seeing new technology things, but I think that we have to show some caution about thinking of this as the infrastructure of the future. I'm not as excited about this as some of the low-tech games personally. It requires embracing this kind of game requires thinking about the goal as sparking playfulness that might connect people to each other. We're not pushing content. It's not about we need to educate people about these 5 facts as much as the game opens new space for engaging our communities and discovering, meeting our neighbors, new space to talk to someone who's different from us. And I want to show you one last project, which is We've also, we got a grant from the Mellon Foundation and the Luce Foundation in DC. We have a truck that's a repurposed food truck we call the Humanities Truck. It has a map of DC on the outside. It has magnetic walls. You can very quickly put up magnetic posters or tape things to it. Show you just a quick video of what it feels like. So the goal is to meet people where they are, and that might be at an event. So it's not media that's anytime, anywhere. It's sometime, somewhere. Designing play experiences and engagement experiences that make our cities richer. They are not about maximizing the number of hours that somebody's going to play this game, but about connecting them differently to play. And here, the infrastructure of the truck, one of the most important things it did was providing the microphones for that sound project. So it's often mixed projects, transmedia, there's some musical performance and the game. The game is never doing all of the lifting. It's instead more about integrating and situating it within the community. Of course, if you step into the truck, the walls of the inside of the truck form almost a miniature museum. You can put whatever you want on the walls, and that can provide a kind of depth. So the pitch I would make is that this is infrastructure. This is infrastructure for communities. It can go to a different place each weekend, even on city days. Weekdays. It could go to schools. In the first couple years that we had the truck out, we estimate that thousands of people, 3,000 to 4,000 people, went in and engaged in the experience inside the truck in an in-depth way. So the goal is not necessarily to reach millions, but rather to engage the residents there more deeply in the places and communities that they are in. There's also, just in the interest of time, we started a couple of minutes late, so I'm gonna go fast over a couple of the last slides. We also brought it to teachers. This is at a teacher professional development day, and we parked the truck out front, caught the eye of teachers in a totally different way, and we gave them calling cards where they could call in and connect to the truck in whatever ways that they saw fit. We made another truck tied to another game tied to the truck with the DC Office of Planning. Again, a different line of funding, but it's the planning agency for the city of DC was actually funding this project, and this was to think a little about neighborhood futures. I'm gonna skip the video there and show you just to conclude that our infrastructures of play are really choices. We're making investments already in play, we're making investments in mobility, and I think that we can go much further toward the direction of games that connect us to our community, to our history, and each other. I would argue that all of our towns and cities have and should make games tied to their local content and communities, and that mobility might be a key way to get there. Thank you.